Welcome to The Explainer. We're all about breaking down big topics into insights you can actually use.
So, can a single sentence really bankrupt a company? Well, today we're going to find out. We're looking at 3 true stories where one simple communication slip-up had, just catastrophic consequences.
Yeah, look at that number. 500 million pounds. No, that's not a typo. That's how much value one company lost, pretty much overnight, all thanks to a single really bad joke.
All right, so for our first story, we're heading back to the UK in 1991. We're talking about a jewelry empire called Ratner's Group. They were huge, famous for selling really affordable stuff. And this right here is the quote that burned it all down. The CEO, Gerald Ratner, is up on stage giving a speech to this super elite business crowd. He's asked how he can sell his products so cheaply, and he says, because it's total crap. He even followed it up with another zinger, joking that a pair of his earrings was cheaper than a prawn sandwich and probably wouldn't last as long. Now, to the fancy folks in that room, he probably sounded hilarious, self-deprecating, but he made this one critical, and very expensive mistake. He totally forgot who was really listening. And this slide just lays it out perfectly, right? There's this huge disconnect. He thought he was talking to the 6,000 elites in the room who would get the joke, but his actual audience, that was millions of his working-class customers who were about to read all about it in the morning papers.
There is actually a term for this. It's called context collapse. It's when a message that's meant for one small group escapes and gets seen by a much, much bigger audience that just doesn't have the context. His private joke became a massive public insult to the very people buying his stuff.
And the fallout was immediate. Customers felt like he was mocking them, like he was calling them stupid for buying his products. That trust was just gone. The company's value tanked, and he got fired. All from one word. Okay, so that was an external communication disaster. For our next story, let's look at what happens when communication breaks down inside a company. This one's about Nokia. It's hard to remember now, but back in the late 2000s, Nokia was everything. They were the absolute kings of mobile phones, untouchable. Then, in 2007, the iPhone launched. And inside Nokia, the engineers, they knew right away they were in serious, serious trouble. So what went wrong? It wasn't about talent. Their engineers were brilliant, and they could see the writing on the wall. They knew their software just couldn't compete. But here's the problem. The middle managers were terrified of their own aggressive bosses. So that bad news, it just never made it to the top. The truth was blocked. So you have to ask, right? How does a company full of brilliant people fail so badly? Was this a problem of competence, or was it something deeper? Something about psychology? And that's exactly it. The failure wasn't technical at all. It was purely emotional. There was zero psychological safety. Basically, people were too scared to speak the truth. The engineers knew what was happening, but the managers, trying to save their own skin, just passed good news up the chain. So the leadership at the top was making huge decisions based on a fantasy, completely disconnected from reality. Okay, our last story. This one's tough. It's the most tragic of the 3, and it really shows what happens when communication failures have the highest possible stakes. We're going to January 1986. The night before the Space Shuttle Challenger is set to launch. The engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the rocket boosters, are sounding the alarm. They have data showing that the cold weather could cause these critical parts called O-rings to fail. They are pleading, do not launch. The engineers hold their ground. They refuse to sign off. And then a senior manager says this to his own team. It's a truly chilling command. Take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat. Let's be clear about what that means. That wasn't a friendly suggestion. It was an order. Stop looking at the data, stop focusing on safety, and start worrying about the launch schedule, the budget, the politics. It was a command to prioritize everything except the facts. And what could they do? Feeling bullied, ignored? The engineers just stopped arguing. They went silent. And this, right here, is the fatal mistake. The managers took that silence as agreement. They thought, okay, they're not objecting anymore, so they must be on board. They mistook silence for consensus.
The next day, the shuttle launched, the O-rings failed, and 7 astronauts lost their lives.
So, looking back at these 3 just devastating stories, what can we actually learn from them? What's the takeaway here? It really boils down to 3 big lessons, doesn't it? First, from the Ratner story, you have to know your whole audience. Your words will always travel beyond the room you're in. Second, from Nokia, you've got to make it safe for people to tell the truth. Fear is a virus that blocks vital information. And finally, from NASA, maybe the most important lesson of all, never, ever mistake silence for agreement. You have to actively check if people are on board, especially when the stakes are high. When you look at all 3, the disaster wasn't just in the words that were spoken. It was in the silence. It was in what wasn't said. And that leaves us with a really important question to think about. In your next meeting, when you're quiet, what will your silence mean?